We start here in Beijing, where China has released the numbers from its latest census. The country's population stands at 1.4 billion people. That is up by more than 5% from a decade ago. The shares of young people and seniors both saw growth, but births have been falling in recent years, and the population is aging, raising concerns for the government. Over 60% of Chinese people now live in cities. That saw a 14% rise in population. Rural areas registered a decline. As for ethnic groups, the Han population accounts for around 90% of the country. The number of minorities increased by 10%. Officials say the numbers, though, overall reveal the population has been growing more slowly over the past decade.
The census shows that there is a moderation in population growth over the past decade. The annual average growth rate was 0.53%, 0.04 percentage points lower than the previous decade. That is a result of multiple factors. That is a natural result of China's economic and social development, especially in the process of industrialization and urbanization. It is also a common challenge facing all countries, especially developed countries. If we look at the changes, China's population growth will continue to moderate going forward. And population growth is also affected by the age composition, people's mindset, policies, the cost of childbearing, public health, and people's overall health. In the future, sometime, China's population will peak someday, but there are still uncertainties. For some time to come, China's total population will be kept at above 1.4 billion.
So for more now, let's get over to our reporter Cindy Yuen live for us in Beijing. So what are some of the other big takeaways from that news conference?
Hi, Jonathan. So the press has just wrapped up right here. As we just read some of the data on screen, is 1.4 billion with a growth rate of 5.38%. And officials call that a mild growth. Meanwhile, I want to bring your attention to some other data stats about the household size, which shrinks from 3.1 to 2.62. And the sex ratio improved, which is something to look out for. Also, a set of data that's really important is the aging population. That's what everybody is really watching. So from 0 to 14-year-old, the population growth from 1.35%, and 15-year-old to 59 actually decreased 6.79%. That's the main group for where the labor force come from. And then 60 plus is an increase of 5.44%. So that means what the officials also confirmed that it will continue to pressure the aging population will continue to pressure the total population growth in China. Meanwhile, there are some of the first time in this time, the 7th census is all the process is actually digitized. So what that means is they encourage people to scan a QR code to submit their own information, as well as when the survey volunteers go door to door, and they actually submit all the results live. That means when they submit those information, it automatically go into the database. So that's something that they have done for the first time. And let's take a listen what the official said at the presser.
But China's population still ranks #1 in the world. It was still growing over the past decade. The reasons are as follows. First, there is still momentum of population growth. China has a large population base. And second, the policy changes have paid off with the restrictions lifted on a second child. The number of newborns has rebounded. Third, average life expectancy is growing with economic and social development and rising living standards and medical services. People's overall health has been improving. With that, the annual death figure is smaller than that of newborns. China's population growth will continue to moderate going forward. These positive factors will continue to exist.
So Ziyuan, these numbers have huge impact on policies for China and everything ranging from the economy to healthcare to pensions. So which areas do you think are going to be most affected based on these census numbers?
So some of the most watched area, first of all, I want to emphasize on the labor force that's really tied into the China's economic growth. And let me reiterate some of the numbers I just mentioned on my first question is that the age group from 0 to 14 up 1.35%. And let's pay attention to this number. So the age group from 15 to 59 actually down 6.79%. What's that mean? This is the age group that include the majority of the labor force. So according to official at the presser, he said 16 to 59-year-old, the labor force population, it's about 880 million. And also one thing that I want to bring your attention to is actually the average age of this population. It stands at 38.8 years old. And also they provide data for reference is America is they also stand at around 38-year-old. When people actually at the presser, one of the media outlets asked whether this number will lead to the change in child policy in China. Officials said as long as the total child birth stands around 10 million every year, it's okay if the growth rate actually grow very slow, but as long as it hit the number of 10 million, that's something to look out for. Meanwhile, they also explain why the fertility rate actually decline. It's because actually not decline. I mean it grow slower. It's because first of all, the cost to raise a child is huge, and then women willingness to give birth to a child, the age group also shrink. In addition to that, that leads to the birth rate decline. So that's what the officials say at the presser. Something to look out for again is first of all whether that will lead to a child policy change, we're not sure yet, but there is a mark to look out for. It's the 10 million. Second of all is the tie to economy. They say we are still having a strong labor force. So even though the number decreased, but I mean the rate decreased, but we still have enough a huge size of labor force. So when looking at the economic growth tied to the overall labor force, we should look at that more objectively. And also China is looked to transform from a labor-heavy economy into a more intelligent and quality-based development. So that's all I have from here. Back to you, Jonathan.
All right, a lot of information to dig through there. It's Ziyuan live for us in Beijing. Thank you. Well, let's continue this conversation and bring in a demographic expert, Professor Jung from the Institute of Population and Labor Economics at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Professor, it's good to have you with us on the show. So the big headline is that China's population continues to grow by about 5%, but it's growing more slowly than in decades past. We just heard one of the officials say that China's population will peak. It's unclear when, but when do you think that we might see the population peak and possibly shrink?
Well, we think this population growth will continue, but not for long. Actually, I think this is the last census to see the population growth. It will peak in the next 10 years, maybe less than 10 years, because the 0 to 14 population growth in the last several years, it is because the policy effect. But this effect already see the end. So I don't expect it will continue such a growth in the future.
So Professor, with that in mind then, you're saying that population, we could expect to see it start to shrink in the next decade. How big of a concern is that for the government?
Well, I think that the government is aware of that because this negative population growth or population decline has been predicted or projected 20 years ago. So I think the state get prepared for that. I am sure about that. And according to that, actually it is not I think the big issue is not the growth or decline in the numbers, but also the aging, the structure change of the population. I think that is very important. As the mentioned before, that the labor's age population is large, but population is also aging.
Well, let's talk.
They're getting older.
And let's talk about that more, Professor, here, because, yeah, the population of people above the age of 60 grew by more than 5% since 2010. It now accounts for nearly 20% of China's population. So when you look at the country's population, especially when you look at the per capita income in China, what are the implications for pensions and for healthcare and for the country overall?
Well, definitely when the population is aging, there's more investment or more cost on the medical health care, and there's a lot of issues, yes. And we already, I think this kind of issue has been discussed for several decades. We have learned experiences and lessons from the developed countries. They are already aging. But this is a big challenge. We cannot copy the policies from other countries because first, China is very big, and second, we are still in the development process. We are not so rich, and so I think this is all the systems need to get ready for that challenge in the future. And I think the real big challenge we will see is 10 or 20 years later because of longevity and more elderly population and growing very fast.
So, Professor, let's talk. Professor, let's talk real quickly about one of the big policies here that Chinese government has around demography, which is the one-child policy, which was loosened a few years ago to allow most families to have 2 children. Do you think that the policy should be loosened further? We just heard our reporter say that it's something the government may consider.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but actually, I think right now the low fertility is not policy dependent. The low fertility is because there's low fertility, low childbearing desire among the young people. They don't want to have more children because a lot of cost, opportunity cost and the financial cost, and also time cost for child rearing and for education of children. So there's a lot of constraints. I think the government need to think about to make some change to solve the problems of low fertility desire.
It's a complicated process here, a complicated issue here for China. Professor Jung from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, thank you for your time. Let's focus in on that one-child policy because in 2016, China eased its nearly 4-decade policy to allow most families to have 2 children. It was expected to give a boost to a rapidly aging society. Experts say this made the birth rate bounce back, but only for a short period of time. CGTN's Gao Ang explains why.
Mrs. Jiang was born before the era of China's one-child policy. She's the youngest of 4 siblings. Married for over 2 decades, she and her husband have no kids of their own.
Back then, it wasn't a problem for me. My siblings have kids, so my parents didn't pressure me.
And for husband and wife, their careers came first. Mrs. Jiang became a manager in her late 20s and even went back to work after retirement.
At that time, it wasn't easy for Chinese staff to secure high-level roles at foreign firms. It took a lot of effort.
Mr. Ye's family paints a different picture. From 2016, China started allowing up to 2 children per household. Mr. Ye and his wife are one of the couples who took advantage of the policy. That same year, they welcomed their second daughter.
It's noisy. We think that with 2 kids in the family, the girls will be able to support each other and share responsibilities like taking care of the elderly in the future.
Hello， 大家好，我是可妈，我已经。
But for some younger Chinese like 26-year-old Zeng Zeyu, better known as 可妈 on Weibo, kids are a source of contentment. And Zeng is expecting her second child.
就是你要不就是还没有，要不然就是你已经有。
Whether you have none yet or you want a second child, I think having more than one brings a stronger sense of happiness.
Despite such sentiments and incentives for bigger families, China's birth rate has been on the decline.
Family planning has been in Chinese law for decades. Although it's seen as one reason behind the country's low birth rate, other factors include rapid urbanization, higher levels of education among the population, and economic development. Plus, sustained economic growth comes with higher living costs for a family's basic needs, like housing, education, and healthcare.
Some experts say this has weakened a willingness to have children because many don't feel financially secure.
这个是个系统性问题。
It's a systematic problem. Changing one part of the system won't solve the whole problem. It is a life cycle of economic and psychological pressure, from the moment a child is born to when he or she has a family of their own.
Some experts say China's current population trends may undermine its economic development. So in order to sustain progress, governments may need further policy changes and support for the workforce, the elderly, and growing families. 港 CGTN 北京